Why does hating Jewish people seem so common across history and now? There's a podcast called Our Fake History that has a pretty good explainer on where a lot of the problem started in Europe, and it all had to do with money. In a nutshell, Christians weren't allowed to do loans that had interest. Jewish people weren't allowed to do loans with other Jewish people. Christian people got antsy that the Jewish people could afford to do loans, and the monarch at the time was okay with the loans, the Christians were okay with it, the taxes gained from extra people moving in was okay with it. Until it wasn't. The Christians didn't like that the Jewish people doing the loans were so well off. And it spiraled into, well, their religion is different from ours because they can do loans with interest, so they need to get kicked out of the country. And it just sort of passed down generation to generation to the point where it's stereotyped and racism feeds into more racism. Historically, two things happened in Europe. Most of medieval Europe was very parochial with law and justice, mostly relying on family and community ties. Jews didn't assimilate into these communities, so when people needed a scapegoat they lifted a finger to help them. Second reason is that local rulers saw the advantage of having small, vulnerable populations and decided to be their protectors and sometimes legal owners, exploiting aspects of their status like usury and mysticism. Jews made a lot of money out of this at the cost of gaining more hate from the people and being reliant on the local ruler who would liquidate their assets and kick them out when it became convenient. This also happened to other groups like the Templars in France or the Flemings in 1381 London, but Jews were caught in a cycle of migration, exploitation, and expulsion that lasted centuries. Throw in issues of heterodoxy, periods of strife, and religious conflicts with Muslims, then you have flare-ups of anti-Semitism. As for modern anti-Semitism, I'm not getting into that can of worms. Being around for a really long time without ever assimilating, or disbanding, or folding into someone else's ethnic or religious majority. If there were still Hittites around after 4,000 years, following their own Hittite religion, and still speaking some modernized version of Hittite or whatever, lots of people would be prejudiced against them too. Especially if whenever you tried to pogrom them they had a tendency to pack up and leave and go somewhere else to survive and rebuild, and maybe even come back stronger. Consider also the Roma, for example. Their history with other cultures and the workings of prejudice against them are not the same as Jews, but it is comparable in many ways. They are scapegoats because they are very different with a distinct culture, faith, language, and even looks. Many are quite intelligent, educated, successful, and wealthy, too. Jealously and scapegoating, they have gotten blamed for everything. I've seen people blame Jews for the bubonic plague, immigration, capitalism, the rise of communism, the fall of communism, World War II, the 9/11 attacks, political correctness, Satanism, and more. Small groups are easy scapegoats. We see this in so many cases. I like and support the Jewish people. I don't like and want support the current Israeli government. And for the record, I am not a right-winger, Trumptard. Hell no. I think the honest answer is we aren't sure. Jews have tried to theorize on the cause of anti-Semitism, but it really is a shapeshifting virus. Back when religion was more important, Jews were hated for their religion. Then when nationalism became a thing, they were hated for being a stateless minority. When capitalism and communism were a big deal, they were hated for being socialist or wealthy. Now when the West is obsessed with colonial guilt, they hate the Jews cause they think they are colonial. I once heard a saying, tell me what you hate the Jews for, and I will tell you what you were guilty of. Don't forget the Crusades. Some crusaders couldn't resist killing Jewish communities on the way to the Holy Land, example. Rhineland massacres. Across history has been all types of reasons. Now it's because the media is telling people to. I mean, holy shit, there was a viral video of a Jewish man climbing a ladder and now everyone says Jews live in tunnels under New York City. Critique of Israel is not critique of all Jewish people. Because the haters stem from two offshoot religions that adherents have to believe get it right where the Jews got it wrong. Religious cult vanity has always driven anti-Semitism. Still does. Dude, you need to stop assuming people who hate Israel hate Jews. That's like assuming people who hate the war in Ukraine hate all Russians. There is a broader pattern. Some communities have core values of strong families, education, traditional wisdom, and hard work. These communities have a decided advantage. Other communities often fall into resentment of this success. This is one of the oldest stories of mankind. Cain and Abel. People with any common sense don't hate Jews. I don't hate Jewish people, but people think I do when I say I hate the IDF and Israeli government. Lol, they are not the same thing. I think because they have managed to maintain a stable identity for thousands of years. As a stable identity, they don't assimilate into a population and are always an outsider group over that time period. Bad things have happened and there are the Jews, just kind of there all the time. I think it is easy to slip into a worldview that since this outsider group is always around when bad things happen, it must be their fault, so instead of applauding the cultural robustness and creativity of this group, they get blamed for everything. Have you ever seen or been in a chat room on the dark web? It is the most racist and anti-Semitic thing you will see aside from a few exceptions. A lot of these pro-Palestine protesters who truly don't consider themselves anti-Semitic have no idea the realities Jews face every day, and they claim that Jews love playing the victim. It's very ignorant. Jewish people have historically been victims of extreme prejudice and genocide throughout history. As for why, hard to say. Much of their hardship was faced in Europe, and Europeans were infamously hostile to any outsiders. See here, the history and struggles of the Romani people as well. Combine that with lingering Christian extremist ideology, and you have a cocktail of anti-Semitism and prejudice in general. However, Israel is another situation entirely. There has been a rise in anti-Semitism, certainly, but that is not the same as being anti-Israel. People are against Israel because it is a violent oppressor state that's been freely committing human rights violations for decades and an active genocide for all the world to see right now. The genocide in Gaza is different from the rest. I don't understand why so many people interpreted being pro-Palestine or calling for a ceasefire as hating Jewish people, but it's simply not true. So many people at college campus protests across the US right now are Jewish, and they are the very proof that conflating the two is wrong and dangerous. Because they are foreigner. And even worse, they insist on having and maintaining a very distinct identity. So even after centuries they are still the other.